Push the record button and get this rolling. Hi, everyone. Good evening. I am so happy to have all of you here with us this evening as we celebrate Dr. Molly Howe's and her book, A Good Apology. I am really excited to hear the conversation between her and Roy Peter Clark, who is another special guest that we have this evening. And on behalf of everyone at Tombolo Books, and especially Alsace, who is our owner, I just want to say thank you to all of you for being here with us this evening. Just as a little bit of background about the bookstore before we get started, I just wanted to let you guys know some of the stuff that we have going on. We're really excited. We just recently expanded our in-person shopping hours, which is really cool. So it's a shop in person by scheduled time. So if you are in St. Petersburg or in the Tampa Bay area, you can come in and have a 45-minute shopping window on Tuesdays and Sundays from our time slots are from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. and you can go and sign up for that on our website. We're also doing curbside pickup, contact-free delivery from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. And we also ship across the country as well. So if you have not ordered your copy of A Good Apology, I'm going to put links in our in the chat box periodically, and you'll be able to come and get that from Tombolo Books, and we'll get that shipped to you. So without further ado, I'll do a brief introduction of Molly and Roy. And I don't know if I said my name now that I'm just thinking about it. I'm Kelsey. I'm the events coordinator at Tombolo Books. So with us this evening, we have Roy Peter Clark, who is a senior scholar at the Poinier Institute, one of the most prestigious schools for journalism in the world. He has taught writing at every level, from school children to Pulitzer Prize-winning authors for more than 40 years. As a writer who teaches and a teacher who writes, he has authored or edited 19 books on writing and journalism, including The Art of X-Ray Reading, How to Write Short Writing Tools, The Glamour of Grammar, and Help for Writers. He lives in St. Petersburg, Florida, where he is considered a garage band legend, as we heard from the intro. Very cool. And our very special guest this evening, and who we are here to celebrate, is Dr. Molly Howe, who is also from St. Petersburg, Florida, but is currently now in Massachusetts. And Dr. Howe is a Harvard-trained clinical psychologist and award-winning writer. Following a clinical fellowship at Harvard Medical School, she completed her PhD in clinical psychology from Florida State University and a postdoctoral fellowship at Harvard Community Health Plan. Dr. Howe has contributed to research projects studying the interpersonal effects of depression, the impact of parents' cancer on a child's psychological well-being, and the incidence and prevalence of mental health disorders in primary care practices and in larger international populations. She is the author of several academic papers and presents at conferences for professional organizations such as the American Psychological Association. She is a McDowell Fellow and has been published in the New York Times Modern Love column, Best American Essays, NPR's Morning Edition, and elsewhere. For 35 years, she has maintained an independent psychotherapy practice in which she treats couples as well as individual patients of all ages. So, without further ado, I am going to hand it over to Roy and Molly. Thank you both so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you for everybody for being here and for Tombolo Books. It's just terrific to be able, under these circumstances, to get together and talk about what I think is a really important book. Molly, why don't you, I know you've got some people you want to sort of talk about a little bit and thank, and why don't you kick it off, and then we'll begin our conversation.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm going to read a passage too, but first I would like to, Kelsey, I want to thank you and Tombolo Books, and also Alsace and Candace, and I think Tombolo is a great contribution to St. Petersburg's literary life. And I'd like to thank Rebecca for introducing me to Tombolo. And Roy, you are a local treasure and an international treasure too. Your lessons have helped many writers become writers and influenced our educations. And so I am delighted that you're here.
Thank you.
For everyone who's here, who's joined us tonight, I want to thank you too. If you're here to support me or Roy, thank you. I appreciate it more than I can say. And if you're here because you want to learn more about how to make good apologies, then thank you for that too. Because every time you make things right between you and another person, you make the world a little bit of a better place. So I'm going to be reading from chapter 4. And by the time you get to chapter 4, you will have already learned about the power and importance of making amends. You'll have learned about why it's so amazingly hard for most of us to do it well. And you'll have learned about the sources of my 4 steps. The apology model draws from many sources, some of them spiritual rituals and ancient practices, which will seem familiar. There's nothing mysterious in this model. I've put it together in a way that's accessible and can be very useful, but it's based on essential human needs and common sense ideas. Okay, chapter 4. Step 1, don't just do something, stand there. Even though we refer to saying I'm sorry, the first part of an effective apology doesn't involve saying anything. It involves listening. Purpose of step 1 is to learn how someone else has been hurt. It's not a time to share your reasons or explanations or your benign intentions or your counter complaints. It's not about alleviating your guilt or shame or any feelings you, the would-be apologizer, have. This step is not about you at all. It's only about understanding the other person's experience of hurt. Margot, a stylish middle-aged woman, came into my office waving a small sheaf of papers. I hadn't seen her for 12 years since she sought help with the emotional aftermath of her divorce. During that therapy, she got herself back on her psychological feet and wasn't interested in further exploration. This time, she described a vexing situation with her close friend Annie, who wouldn't forgive her for something, even though I've said I'm sorry. I remember hearing about Annie's support through Margot's divorce. The two had been very close, planning, half in jest, to live together as old ladies. A competent professional who usually spoke with great confidence, Margot described how confused she was by her friends stonewalling her. 6 months earlier, Margot had broken off contact with Annie after Annie had remained silent when a third friend made insensitive remarks about Margot. Acknowledging her old pattern, Margot said that she'd been silent for months about other hurt and aggravation before she took the coward's way out. She emailed Annie that she was taking a break from the relationship. Immediately, Annie reached out and tried to repair the problem, but that incensed Margot because she felt that her friend disregarded her request for no contact. I read the exchanges, including what Margot called Annie's disrespectful email, saying that she was finding the unpredictable break terribly hard because of her own painful history. Years ago, I had heard that Annie, as a teenager, had been abruptly abandoned by her extended family shortly after the death of her parents. Margot's escalating anger was evident in her strong email language. When Annie replied warmly with an apology and a request to maintain some minimal connection, Margot threatened to lock my doors and windows if you dare to come to my house. Margot seemed to believe that she had simply taken care of a bad situation by taking care of herself. My thudding heart alerted me that Margot had probably hurt her friend more than she had let herself know. Maybe she had come in so I could help her see what she was missing. After months without contact, Margot's anger about previous hurts and Annie's hounding her had cooled. She had then texted Annie a friendly, I just lost something. She then texted Annie a friendly, upbeat message that concluded, "Can we get together soon? I miss you." She'd expected her friend to be relieved and glad to be in touch, but a brief thank you was the only response. After Margot followed with, "I'm sorry for our break, but you know how upset I was," Annie didn't reply for more than a week. Then she wrote, "I'm just not ready to see you," as if nothing happened. Margot was mystified. "I don't get it. I know distancing myself isn't always the best way to handle conflict, but I already said I'm sorry for it. What more does she want from me?" That was the right question, an opening for me. Saying you're sorry is good, but something else has to happen too.
So Molly,
Yes,
that's chapter 4, but
yes,
step 1.
yes.
Can you, if someone is very fascinated by the process, by the creative process, by the writing process, it was really interesting to learn about apologies from your articulation of a series of steps. Can you sketch out for us in the kind of in the global way what those 4 steps are, and then we'll come back to step 1.
Sure, yes. The first step is the one that I was just talking about, which is not saying anything, it's listening. And that's harder. It's much harder for many people. And it's harder because we tend to like to take action to fix something, not to be more receptive and wait or listen. And so for many of us, the idea of asking someone to tell us about something we did wrong, makes our blood run cold. It makes us very defensive and nervous. So it's kind of a hard thing to decide to do. But it's a very important thing to do because it's the base on which the rest of the apology rests. Step 2, you can do if you've done a good step 1. If you've learned about what happened to the other person, then in step 2, you can make a sincere statement of regret and responsibility and empathy, which could include those 2 words, "I'm sorry," but it needn't. But it's more convincing because you know what you're talking about by then, if you've done step 1. Then step 3 is making restitution or reparations. It's making up for the wrong or the harm or the hurt. And in law, that means making the other party financially whole, usually, returning them to their original state monetarily. In a relationship, it's usually, if it's material at all, it's usually symbolic, replacing something that was damaged or lost. But it's much more likely to be a do-over, trying again after something didn't go well. And often people find those sort of awkward and cheesy, but they're really remarkably effective to ask someone for another chance to do it better. And then step 4 is making sure that the problem doesn't come up again by establishing a plan to prevent it, changing the conditions so that whatever produced the hurt or the harm is less likely to happen. And that is not the same as intending to not ever do it again. That doesn't cut it. Good intentions are not enough on that step.
As I read through the book once very quickly and a second time, just to kind of try to learn and internalize some of the steps, I kept getting stuck in step 1. And it was like kind of quicksand. And I kind of felt as if, I don't know, it felt unfair to myself or to things I believed in. to actually listen to somebody's complaint, which felt to me factually incorrect
Yeah,
or
yeah,
exaggerated.
yeah.
And so I was always very much willing for some kind of reconciliation and a conversation that would heal things. But just to be quiet and to listen and to learn about the nature of the complaint was just so difficult. So look, this is like, I have you here for an hour, like for free. Can you help me?
Yes, and I think you're talking about a very common problem. I think step one is the hardest step. It requires a shift in our customary approach. You know, we're used to evaluating right and wrong, and usually I'm not the one that's wrong, you know, and if I'm not wrong, I'm not going to apologize. And, and I'm actually suggesting something very different, which is that the focus is on the impact on the other person, not on whether you did anything wrong. You might not have done anything wrong at all. And you might, the effect on the other person might not have been predictable. It's something that happened that you didn't mean and you couldn't have known. And so you're just such a good person, you know, you shouldn't have to say you're sorry. But to me, the fact that something that you did or didn't do had an impact on somebody else that you care about matters. And it matters more than whether you're right or not. In the beginning, it matters more. You know, ultimately, you may have a chance to tell whether you intended it or not, or what it meant, or why you did it, but in the beginning, it's just about learning the impact that you had on someone else. And repairing the relationship is more important than establishing your rightness or your lack of guilt.
You have a background, you know, not just as a psychologist and a counselor, but as a writer and as a journalist and as a researcher. And you made me think about those times as a professional writer, a professional learner, where I have to basically ask open-ended questions and listen in order to learn, and put aside my skepticism and my cynicism.
Right.
And it frustrated me to realize that this strategy, this technique that I had in my professional life, I wasn't using it in my personal life in the same way. And yeah, I thought that was hugely revealing to me.
Oh, I'm glad. Good.
So one of the things that's great about this book is it's full of wonderful lists, and the lists are interesting, they're compelling, they introduce material, they summarize material, and they have this wonderful take it with you kind of applicability, which I think is going to be very attractive to many readers. And so early on, you offered a list of common mythologies or common myths about apologies. And I have to say, as I was reading it, I was checking out all the things that I believed in, which I now know are myths. Can you touch on some of the most common ones?
Sure.
To kind of give our audience here a sense of the world of kind of off-base thinking about apologies?
Right. Well, one really big one, in particular in our culture, is that an apology is a sign of weakness. And it's, I think, on the contrary, I think it requires great courage and strength to approach someone in this kind of curious way. But I think it looks to some people like weakness because it's not maintaining your certainty and rugged individualism. And, you know, there was a bumper sticker early in Obama's first term that said real presidents don't apologize for their countries like real men don't apologize. And so there are some political overtones here, but I think that it's a sign of strength. I think it takes great wisdom and strength, and it's not a sign of weakness.
Can I just interrupt, Molly, and just say,
Yep.
when I read that, I said to myself, I was, as a young man raised in the 1950s and 1960s, baby boomer, apologies were a sign in a competitive culture, in a male competitive culture in any case. An apology was a sign that you'd lost.
Mm.
That the apologizer is somehow wrong. Apologizer is admitting failure or mistakes or bad choices or things like that.
Right, and that's a certain way of approaching the world that is a dominant sort of thread in our culture. It's not the only one, but it is one model, right? There's a winner and a loser, and if you acknowledge that you may have done something that was mistaken, then you're the loser. I just don't buy that as a model for living.
Is this, as long as we're on it, is this an aspect? Is American culture? Is this represent American culture more than if we went to Italy or Indonesia or Canada or some other place? Is this something? What's your take on that?
Yes, I think Western cultures in general, but I think United States especially. Yep. And there's, in fact, with regard to Canada, there's a joke about Canadians who apologize all the time. There's a book about how to be a Canadian even if you already are one, and it teaches you how to apologize. It's a very common it's almost a verbal tick like some people have in this country, and often women are teased about saying I'm sorry all the time. It's not, in that case, it's a digression, but that apology is not really an apology. That I'm sorry is not an apology. It's some other verbal facilitation of something, but it does not mean.
So Molly, I want to mention something. We talked about this in a previous conversation, and at first I was kind of hesitant to kind of make the point, but you were very receptive and encouraging, and the point I mentioned to you is that about halfway through the book, I said to myself, this book is called A Good Apology, 4 Steps to Make Things Right. But if someone were to ask me what the book was about, I think that I would say that it's about much, much more than that.
Yes.
And things that are bigger than that. That the apology is to me, is the doorway through which you approach the severing and harm that comes within human relationships and pathways to heal that. And I think what's quite remarkable about the work is that listening to the anecdote that you read about Margot and Annie suggests, as it does, that this is a book that emphasizes interpersonal relationships. But it's also, it transcends person to person. It's also about the hurt that comes between groups of people, between generations, between countries, and things like that. And yes, so I want to kind of I want the potential readers of this book to realize how big this is and how ambitious it is.
Thank you. That's beautiful. I appreciate your saying that. I want to just piggyback on something you said right at the end, which is about the larger groups, because I think that first step, the problem of the first step, the humble curiosity that's necessary for the first step, could make a lot of difference in larger groups, right? We don't know what the other side, we think of them as the other side, and we don't really know what they think or what matters to them, and we are not really curious. We're not interested. And you know, there's a man named Peter Wenner who's a conservative columnist and thinker, and he said we should have more epistemological modesty. You know, we should know that we don't really know, and ask as if we don't know. And I think that's I think it would make the world a much more, I think getting along with people would be much more feasible if we
now, I don't think, I'm just trying to, we share, I think we share a publisher.
Yes, we do.
And so I know a little bit about the, how long it takes to write a book and that sort of thing. And so I'm thinking about all of the things that have happened since the beginning of the year.
Mm.
Now, your book was written by then. Am I right about that? I mean,
yes.
Yeah. And so I'm reading it, and I'm thinking about all of the disruption that has happened, everything that's happened on the streets, all the confusion, social protests, cries for social justice, people demanding, we'll call them apologies or reparations or a repair of a broken and hurtful system. And so I'm certainly seeing, if you, in the next edition of your book, I could see you drawing upon so many of these current moments. I sense you've been thinking about those kinds of things as well.
Absolutely, I have. And I want you to talk to the publisher about that suggestion, please. Yeah, so I think that the biggest overdue apology of our time is the one that white Americans owe Americans of color. And I think this particular model does apply. I mean, the scale is enormous and it's you know, unbelievably complex. So it's not like 4 little steps, but neither is my model 4 little steps. It's 4 types of engagement and layers of engagement. And each one of those is, I think, a possible avenue for someone who wants to approach a big repair that needs to be made. You know, I think all those steps are necessary, and none of them is sufficient in itself. Reparations, for example, is, you know, on the table, and this bill in Congress, HR 40, about to study the feasibility and what would be necessary for reparations for slavery, is closer than it's ever been to becoming passed, and yet I've heard other people say, well, financial reparations are not anywhere near enough. You know, the Black communities need all these other much more important things, and that is true. They do need all these other things, just like all the steps in themselves. Each of the steps in itself is not enough. Yes, I think these steps could be applied to the issues that are front and center right now, and should be.
So can you talk a little bit about where the cases come from, where the stories, where the case studies, and where the, you know, where all that knowledge and exemplary kind of narratives, you know, where they come from and how you use them.
Right. Each of the stories is drawn from real people and real circumstances, but they're all combined and they're all transformed, and none of them represents actual people now. And I used them because somewhere in their story there was an important piece of this process illustrated, and I wanted to capture that. So most of them are from my practice. Some of them are from you know, other parts of my life, and some are identified as being from other parts of my life. And even those people are sometimes disguised.
Can you talk about the most significant or memorable apology that you ever delivered in your
Oh, geez.
actual life?
Wow, that's a hard question. Well, one that I talk about in the book, I can talk about that one. My sibling had accused me of doing something that hurt him, and it was an unfair. This is the case of your fact question, right? It was an unfair, inaccurate accusation, and I was mad when I received it, and I was writing a book about apologies, and I knew all about step one. Nonetheless, I was mad, and I was mad because it was unjust, and it was inaccurate, and I stewed about it and thought all kinds of things and retorts and unsavory aspects of my sibling, and and that wasn't very useful. So after a while, I realized that I needed to do step one, and I wouldn't have thought that if I hadn't been writing the book, probably. And step one was to go back and bite my tongue and say, "Tell me about it. Tell me what I did and the effect it had on you, because I don't get it, and I would like to know." And there followed, a much better, more meaningful conversation, which was still complicated, but at least I could care about how the other person felt and express that.
So this is something that, as the father of 3 daughters who are now grown, they're in their 40s. I often look back on our lives as a family. I think of moments of hurt and disappointment, and I always wonder about whether those resolve themselves fully without apologies, or whether there may be something lingering that as a father I could attend to. And as I rehearse in my head how these conversations might go,
Mm-hmm.
I think of all the negative things that might happen. I think of, oh God, maybe they've forgotten about that, and I'm bringing up something that's sore. Or maybe I will hurt them by my uncertainty as to whether our love is full and mature. And so, can you, as you hear me say those things, can you offer me, show me a way to think about it?
I don't know about that very last thing that you said, but I think it's almost never too late to, if it's an ongoing relationship, to inquire about something that you think might have hurt someone, and to try to help it heal.
Mm-hmm.
Because hurt does linger, just like guilt lingers, but more. And even if it isn't front and center and it's sort of been put aside, it feels good to have your hurt known and for somebody to care about it. It's a very valuable part of beginning to heal.
What do you think about seeking apologies in that context?
Yeah. Well, usually that's how you find out you have to give an apology, is that somebody tells you did something, right? And hence your opportunity to be a defensive jerk like I was. So I think there are some ways that are better than others for seeking an apology, just like there are better ways to begin giving one. But I think it's important, and And I think maybe the opening there can be similarly soft and curious, like, something happened between us, and I wonder if you'd be willing to talk with me about it because it's bothering me, and is this a good time?
As a writer, I think my daughters always think, well, he's going to write about it sometime, so I'll just wait until then. Kelsey, I'm wondering whether it's a good time to field some questions and inquiries from the audience.
Yeah, yeah.
Put questions in the chat box.
Yeah. It's there are a couple of questions in the chat box, and as we go through the questions, please feel free to continue asking those questions in the chat box. I actually have a couple of questions for you, if you don't mind, as I was listening. So one of the things that you said that I thought was really interesting, and I find it really fascinating, is like the gendered aspect of apologies. Do you find that, women and men tend to apologize differently, or that there's, an expectation, I would say, maybe on women to be the first sort of person to apologize in a situation? Or how did your research sort of shake out in that way?
I think it varies by relationship.
Mm-hmm.
But I think overall men have a bigger burden in that regard than women do, for the reasons that you were saying, Roy, about, somebody's going to win, somebody's going to lose, and I'm going to be the tough guy, or some kind of thing like that. You're not supposed to show what you think of as weakness. But I do have a little study I can read to you about. That's in that same chapter. There was a study. Okay, in addition to the trouble we all have detecting our missteps, one report suggests that men may have an even harder time seeing their mistakes than women do. So a lot of chapter 2 is about how we can't see our mistakes. A recent controlled study led by 4 research schools and laboratories examined the effects of testosterone on human cognition and decision making. Studying hundreds of men, the researchers found that higher testosterone levels decreased a subject's ability to discern flaws in his thinking, which led to overconfidence. So they actually, it turns out they were wrong more often, but they thought they were right more often. This finding suggests that it may behoove men even more than women to make purposeful inquiries into how they've made other people feel. Of course, as Margot demonstrates, women aren't exempt from hurting people without realizing it either. So yeah, so I think there are several reasons why it's harder. But it's like a blind spot when you're driving. You know that you can't see that spot over there, and so you have to take it into account. And right. we know that we don't see our mistakes, and we need other people to tell us. And so we just ought to.
Can I make a slight distinction?
Sure.
Which is that I can think back many times when I realized that I was wrong, but I realized that someone that totally got it. My moral compass in Catholic school, I just knew that this was wrong, but I would not admit it.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, the problem was admitting it and not recognizing, for me, what that is.
Right. Yeah. I think it could go. Both those things could happen for sure.
Awesome. So I'm gonna give you some comments from the chat box now. So we have a question that says, what do you suggest to do if you offer to hear someone's hurt and they refuse?
Yeah. Well, it's an invitation. It's not a demand, and the other person can say no. It might be that it takes more than one try, though, because sometimes it's not the right moment. The person isn't ready to talk about it, or they're still too raw or hurt or angry, or they're in the middle of something else and they don't want to talk about it then. So it's important to make that distinction, whether they're just unwilling to ever talk about it or whether this is a kind of a bad time. But it is the other person's call, I think.
Right. So someone says, congratulations, first of all, on your book. And their question is about a writing technique. As you constructed your book, how did you work with the case studies and exposition to maintain tension for the reader?
Thank you, whoever congratulated me. Yeah, I tried to introduce the cases in the chapter where their sort of hallmark issue arose, you know, in that content. But then they show up again later, and at first I don't think the reader knows they're going to come back, but they do come back, and then I think that generates interest because, you know, what Margot and Annie ended up doing was fascinating. Their resolution was beautiful and really cool, and so I think there is some sort of you know, tension and narrative interest in that, and the stories coming back, and then they illustrate something else, you know.
Yeah, my take on that as a writing teacher is that this would be a good example of a strategy technique that's, I think, that's very effective and very common, just called the broken line. And the line refers to, you know, a storyline. Mm-hmm. And if you read a novel, that storyline is continuous. But if you're reading certain works of nonfiction that are also informational, is that right. the movement between story and understanding is very good, very powerful, very well balanced. Mm. I've become an impatient reader as I've gotten older, and I just couldn't wait to meet the next person and to learn the next lesson in Molly's book.
Cool. I actually have, so personally, I have a structural question too, because so my day job is I'm a historian. I work at the Florida Holocaust Museum in downtown St. Petersburg. I'm one of the museum educators. And what I find interesting is taking something like disciplinary, such as history or psychology, and then making it accessible to a public audience, right? Sort of, I guess, you know, solidifying that down to where it becomes something practical for someone's life, as you've done here with this book. What was your process of sort of taking that research mindedness, I guess, and then, you know, parsing it down to something that someone could actually use who maybe doesn't have a psychology background or, you know, what have you?
Right. Well, I tried to define my terms, you know, if I introduce something to say in terms that people could understand. But also a lot of my research had to do with real life stories from the newspaper. You know, I read the newspaper with a pen and scissors in my hands, and I save stories and in a box under my desk. And so those start off accessible. You know, so we're starting with real life stuff, and then we start with, you know, patient stories. But many of the much of my curiosity came from, you know, real life experiences that everybody has access to and can learn about. And then I would go off on some other tangent and dive deep into a field that actually was not my primary field, and just, you know, geek out about it and have to kind of bring that back in to, you know, to weave it with the other material. And that was actually really fun. And I had some very good readers who pointed out, no, you gotta, you gotta make that in words with fewer syllables or something. So that helped a lot too.
Yeah, for sure. So someone asked, do you think you'll ever publish your memoir? She said they said they found your independent articles very interesting and helpful, and wanted a full memoir.
Oh gosh, I wish I could. Yes, I hope I do someday. It didn't sell its first time out to publishers, but maybe. And maybe I'll work on it after this. Well, next I'm going to try to write a social justice book, but then maybe I'll go back to it and rewrite it some. I hope so.
Roy, that's another one for the publisher to to put a good word in over there so that we can get Molly's.
Make a note, right?
Yeah, that's for you. That's a job for you. Someone asked, and this person is, it looks like they're from Toronto, Ellen Gardner. So they said, great discussion, Molly. Interesting that you say Canadians like to apologize a lot. It starts with our prime minister, who seems to apologize every second day.
He's my favorite example.
Yeah.
He's a character in the book.
Yeah.
He's a big character in the book.
Yeah. Is there a certain point at which apologies can become shallow and meaningless? And how do you restore a sense of sincerity around apologies? And there was a question actually that pointed earlier kind of towards relationships within the United States, especially between the white and black communities, and where do those apologies sort of fall flat? Where does that fall short? And how do you make sure that it doesn't?
Right. Well, I think slow it down, so that you do step one and pay attention so that what you're talking about is the same thing. Starters. Also, one kind of repeated apology that doesn't work is if it's for the same thing and it didn't get fixed. You heard again in the same way, and we have a lot of that in our racial history in the United States. So it would not be very convincing to say, I'm not going to do this again, or we're not going to do this again in that case, because we do. So, yeah. So unless you do step 4 and really change the circumstances, then it shouldn't be believable. It shouldn't be believed because it's not believable. About Justin Trudeau, I guess he does apologize often, but he sure does it well. He does the whole process. He may do a lot of ones that aren't as good, but the ones that I've witnessed, he does the whole process. He does very extensive research, or his people do, about the harm, and he makes beautiful, heartfelt statements, seemingly heartfelt statements, and then he changes things. He makes things right, and he changes. It's very impressive. And I guess if he did that every day, and he cried every time, maybe it wouldn't be as moving. It wouldn't be as moving.
I want to say something about kind of public speech, where we've really moved into a kind of a culture in which, I suppose enhanced by social media, in which people make remarks that others find offensive or hurtful. And there's a kind of, there's a kind of a pro forma apology that I find worse than silence, because it feels so superficial.
Right.
I would rather, I don't want people to say objectionable things or hurtful things, but when they do in the public sphere, they reveal themselves. And as citizens, we can then, respond to that. We can vote them out, or we can argue against the statements. I think there are more apologies maybe now than there have ever been, but they just, in public life, the cycle seems more inauthentic than
right.
than it needs to be.
I think there are two different things here. One is that there's a model of apology statements in public which are kind of baloney, that you can see it. It just seems ridiculously insincere. And the person is not talking to the person they harmed. They're talking to the rest of us. So it's, misguided. And often it's misdirected. And often it's misguided because they don't really know about the harm to the other person because they didn't bother to find out. Sometimes they don't even mention the hurt person by name, and they don't do anything to change it. They're facile and superficial. And another thing is in social media, what often happens is some reaction and then a reaction against it that's fast. So it's the speed of the first behavior, and then the speed of the response, and the response to that one, and sort of the cancel culture and all that. It's it doesn't allow time for human response, because human response takes longer than that. You know, we have to be reflective. We have to see what comes up when we consider this, and, you know, what it means, and, you know, and so the reactivity and the speed of it, I think, is a big drawback for making real repairs. I think what we get is pinballs instead of real serious dialogue and reconciliation.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Someone mentioned, you know, you were talking about apologies that are not really apologies. Said the Congressman's apology to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez recently, which was just, you know,
Right.
there was nothing apologetic about that
Right.
whatsoever.
Oh no, there was something in it.
Oh,
He said one thing. He said, "I apologize for something like introducing strife in an already contentious Congress."
oh, well,
And that actually was a good thing to apologize for, because he did. But he didn't say anything. He didn't do any of the steps, and he didn't mention her name. And then he also said some things that invalidated it, like
the counter.
like I didn't say that, and if they think I did, then I apologize for their misunderstanding, which is so bad, because it seems like it's an apology at the beginning of the sentence, but by the end, it's blaming the other person for not getting something. And, yeah, and he also said, I won't apologize for my passion. You know, really.
Yeah, just a mess from start to finish, really. So we have another question. Someone says, a friend who owns a public relations and marketing company has a policy of never apologizing in corporate situations and has adopted that in his personal life. They haven't been personally hurt by this person, but is there a way to encourage that person to make amends, or is a third party somehow sort of out of bounds in that sort of situation?
How close is the friendship? You know, I mean, I'm not a business expert, but it seems to me that that might be a mistake in the public relations business also, because there are a lot of data that show when businesses apologize for an error, even an error that causes some harm, they garner more respect and more business than companies who didn't make the mistake in the first place.
Isn't this? Oh, sorry.
A real repair makes people trust you. So I don't know.
I was just going to mention, yeah, I think last night before I went to bed, I took 2 Tylenol. Every time I take Tylenol, I remember a case from the 60s or 70s where somebody put, was it poison?
It was tainted, yeah.
Tainted, you know, and so Tylenol's response as a company has been held up as a kind of a gold standard. Sometimes it's called strategically like getting ahead of the story, but it really means taking a responsibility for repairing the harm that you didn't mean, but was you know, associated with your name and your brand.
Yeah. I'm not sure I answered that person's question about her friend. Sorry.
Well, so if they were good friends, or if it was your good friend, and you know, you knew that that person was you know, had done something to hurt someone else, is it out of bounds for you to be sort of the nudge in the right direction?
I think it's okay to ask someone if they'd like some feedback about something, and then give it to them if they say yes. Probably not okay to give it if they don't want it.
Right, absolutely. So I think everyone's questions from the chat box are, we've gotten to everyone's questions, which is great.
Great.
So we're about 3 minutes left into the program, but I would like to know, you mentioned, if you can talk about this, Molly, you mentioned your idea for writing a social justice book. Do you have an idea of what it is that you would like to do with that?
Right. Well, I was referring to what we were talking about with your observation, Roy, about how this book is, bigger than, it doesn't just apply to individual relationships and things that happen between two people, and also to the issues of racial justice and anti-racist efforts by white people. So sort of that's the ballpark I would be in. Somebody today told me she thinks the book is a stealth social justice book.
Just like quietly in that direction.
Yeah.
No, I mean, absolutely. It's such a great just sort of framework for, how to approach those kinds of situations. So yeah, I think that's a good description of it for sure.
Kelsey?
Yes.
So I have a kind of I read, when I read books, nonfiction books, I very often go to the back of the book first, not to find out how it's going to turn out, but to read the author's afterwards or epilogue. And I find that authors are more transparent about their mission and purpose at the end of the work than they sometimes are at the beginning of the work. Not because they're hiding, but because the process of writing teaches some things that lead them.
Yes.
So I'd like Molly's permission to read a couple of paragraphs from your conclusion, if I may.
That'd be great.
Okay.
I think you're right. I think I couldn't have written that at the beginning.
So it's called You Can Make Things Right. Thank you for spending this time with me. Together, we've walked through stories of people struggling and stumbling and mostly finding their ways to greater integrity and more loving connections. I hope you thought about your own relationships and the apologies that might heal breaches for you. I hope you remember the change in mindset that allows you to listen deeply to someone whose perspective is different from yours. The lessons in this book are old-fashioned and timeless. Listen with an open mind. Take responsibility for your actions. Speak with empathy. Make things right with other people. As such, they are potential targets for mockery, particularly in a postmodern age that devalues sincerity and prizes ironic detachment. I've no defense against the claim of uncoolness. I'm going for something deeper, because there's nothing like an apology, nothing so vast in its impact, and yet so personal in its execution, so powerful and so small. And then a little bit later, I imagine a world where we all seek common ground and common purpose, more than we seek dominance and being right. I imagine taking the heavy stones of shame and resentment from our pockets and stepping more lightly toward one another. I imagine holding myself and my loved ones accountable in a more compassionate way. I think that's a very, very powerful declaration of mission and purpose that is very much sustained by the evidence and the narratives that are in this excellent book.
Thank you.
Well, Molly, thank you so much. I wanted to give you a chance if you had any sort of last closing remarks to make before we sign off. I want to say thank you again to everyone. And I told Molly a while ago, but this couldn't have been possible without her wonderful publicist, Allie Rosenthal. So I just want to shout out to her as well. And I hope that we'll see you all at some more of Tombolo's events. And if you're in the Tampa Bay area, come stop by and see us. We want to see your faces. So
I think the most important take-home message is from the book is that when things have gone wrong between you and someone else, that doesn't have to be the end of the story. I think we settle for premature endings, and there's a lot of hurt that remains unhealed because of that. And I don't think it has to. I think we could try again. I'm a big believer in trying again. And I think taking accountability, taking responsibility for what you do with a clear-eyed approach is an antidote to despair and shame. So this is a hopeful book.
Yeah, for sure. Well, again, Roy, Molly, thank you so much for your time, and everyone who joined us. It's so greatly appreciated, and I hope you all have a really great rest of your evening. So
Thank you all. Thank you all for coming.
Can I ask a quick question?
Oh, sure.
I'm sorry, I missed my window. Is it wrong to, or I should say, what is the best way to gift this book to someone who really needs it? Other than myself, because I do as well. I'm thinking about an in-law in particular that we just battle, and it's ugly, and I would love to share this. And is there?
It might be an interesting thing to do as a joint venture. You know, I got 2 copies of this, one for you and one for me. And I think if we both read this, then we can talk about things in a different way.
That's excellent. Excellent advice. Thank you.
Good luck.
Thank you. I need it.